The fire raged, consuming the studio in a violent storm of heat and smoke. Flames clawed at the walls, roaring like a beast with an insatiable hunger. Cedric White was frantic, his eyes wild with desperation as he tried to push past me. "She's still in there," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "You can't!" I screamed, throwing myself in front of him. "You'll lose your life if you go in." With every ounce of strength I had, I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. The force of it, the sheer desperation, was enough to snap something deep in my right hand. Pain shot through me, sharp and unforgiving, as the tendons tore apart. By the time Cedric stopped struggling, it was too late. The fire had already claimed her. My sister, Bianca, was gone. From that moment, he never forgave me. He used his power, his wealth, and his influence to force me into a loveless marriage, a cruel mockery of what a union should be. "You murdered her," he would say, his eyes cold and unyielding. "You deserve to burn for what you've done. Until then, I'll make sure you pay for it every single day." And he did. My life became a prison, and guilt was the chain he wrapped around my throat. But then, I woke up. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, and found myself back on the day of the fire. The heat was suffocating, the smoke thick and choking. The flames danced wildly, just as they had before. And there was Cedric, standing in front of me, ready to throw himself into the blaze. This time, I didn't stop him. Chapter 1. The sky was ablaze, and the studio was engulfed in fire. The air reeked of burning wood and paint, and the heat pressed against my skin like a living thing. That's when it hit me I had been brought back. Back to the day of the fire. Inside the inferno, I could hear Bianca's screams, sharp and raw, cutting through the chaos. "Cedric! Help me! It hurts! Please!" Her voice was filled with panic, with pain. Cedric was already moving, his face pale and his eyes burning with desperation. "She's in there!" he shouted, his voice breaking as he tried to push past me. "Stop!" I grabbed his arm, holding on for dear life. He didn't care. He fought against me like a man possessed, his only thought to reach Bianca. His grip closed around my wrist, crushing it in his fury. The pain was instant, sharp and electric, and I could feel something snap. "Sandra," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "If anything happens to Bianca, you'll pay for it with your life." And he meant every word. In my last life, Bianca didn't make it out of the fire. When they finally pulled her from the wreckage, her body was unrecognizable, charred beyond recognition. She was gone. Cedric turned his grief into hatred. "You murdered her!" he had screamed, his rage consuming him. "If you hadn't stopped me, she would still be alive." From that day forward, Cedric made it his mission to destroy me. He knew my dream was to become a world-renowned artist, so he shattered it. Literally. He grabbed my hand, the one I had used to hold him back, and snapped the tendons, rendering it useless. I could never paint again. But his cruelty didn't stop there. He dragged me through the mud, ensuring that everyone believed Bianca's accident was my fault. My classmates, my teachers, they all turned on me. I became the girl who had murdered her sister. My life spiraled into chaos. When I tried to take the college entrance exams, Cedric used his influence to have me barred from the exam hall. And then, as if ruining my future wasn't enough, he married me. It wasn't love. It wasn't even for show. It was punishment. Every night, he locked me in a custom-built sauna, cranking the heat until I could barely breathe. "Do you know how much Bianca suffered as she burned alive?" he would say, his voice icy and calm. "Do you have any idea how much she hurt, how much she begged? You don't get to be happy, Sandra. Not in this life. Not ever. This is what you deserve." And so, I lose my life. Alone, suffocating in the heat, my body racked with regret. But now, I was here again. The fire raged before me, consuming everything in its path. Cedric stood in front of me, his body coiled with tension, ready to dive into the flames. This time I let go. I released my grip on his arm and stepped back, my heart cold and steady. I watched as he rushed into the fire, his figure swallowed by the smoke and flames. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with ash, but I didn't move. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, letting fate take its course. By the time they pulled Cedric from the fire, he wasn't the man he used to be. His once proud figure was broken, his body charred and scarred beyond recognition. He had thrown himself over Bianca to protect her, shielding her with his own body. But it had cost him dearly. As the paramedics loaded their blackened forms onto stretchers, I followed silently. When Cedric's parents arrived at the hospital, they were met by a doctor holding a clipboard, his expression grim. "Are you the family? We need someone to sign the consent forms for surgery." I stood in the corner silent, watching as Cedric's fate unfolded. Chapter 2. The fire was too severe. His leg nerves are completely destroyed. Amputation is the only option. Mrs. White let out a strangled gasp before collapsing to the ground unconscious. Mr. White caught her just in time, his face pale with shock and grief. But when he turned and saw me standing there, his expression twisted into fury. "You!" he barked, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You claim to care about him, don't you? If you really cared, why didn't you stop him? How could you just stand there and let him run into the fire like that? Do you have any idea how much you've disappointed us?" I bit back the smirk threatening to form on my lips and replied calmly. "Mr. White, I did try to stop him. He wouldn't listen to me. What was I supposed to do? Physically drag him away?" I paused for effect, letting the sharpness of my words sink in. Then I added coolly, "Besides, I'm not part of your family. I'm not Cedric's wife. I have no authority to tell him what to do. He made the decision to risk his life for the person he truly loves, and no one else has the right to interfere with that." Mr. White's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew I was right. He knew exactly who Cedric had rushed into the fire for. And yet, his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He turned back to the doctor, mumbling desperate prayers that they could somehow save Cedric's legs. But it was no use. In the end, Cedric lost both. When I saw him later, his once proud figure reduced to a broken, charred shell, I felt nothing but satisfaction. The great Cedric White was brought to his knees. I didn't have long to savor the moment before a nurse stormed toward me, urgency etched across her face. "Are you Bianca's family? Your sister just tried to suicide. Come quickly." I followed her to Bianca's hospital room, and before I even stepped inside, I could already hear her shrill, angry cries. "How am I supposed to dance now? What's the point of living if I can't perform? Why did you save me? You should have just let me there." When I entered, the sight was almost laughable. My mother was clutching Bianca as if her life depended on it, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's all your sister's fault." She wept. "She didn't protect you. You're twins, she should have done more. But don't worry, Bianca, I'll make her give you a skin graft. I'll fix this for you. Please, don't give up, my darling. Don't lose hope." The moment my father saw me, his face darkened with rage. He stormed toward me, his finger trembling as he jabbed it in my direction. "This was your doing," he roared. "You've always been jealous of Bianca. You knew how important this competition was to her, you knew it was her dream to dance, and you deliberately set that fire to ruin her." I stared at him unflinching as he continued his tirade. "You've been jealous of her since you were children. You've hated her talent, her beauty, her success. Admit it, you did this on purpose." Before I could respond, he raised his hand to strike me. In my last life, this was how it had always been. When Bianca gone, my parents turned their grief into hatred. They blamed me for everything, their anger so visceral that I often wondered if they would truly skin me alive if they could. Bianca and I were twins, identical in every way but one. They loved her, and they merely tolerated me. Growing up, anything Bianca wanted, she got. Anything I liked instantly became hers if she so much as showed an interest in it. My parents had a favorite, and they didn't bother hiding it. You're the older sister. They'd always scolded me. You need to take care of your little sister. You need to protect her. But it was a cruel lie. I wasn't the older sister Bianca was. She had been born a minute before me. I should have been the one protected. Instead, I was the scapegoat. When Cedric turned his grief into vengeance, my father praised him. You deserve it, he'd said when Cedric broke me. You brought this on yourself. And when Cedric proposed to me not out of love, but out of a desire to punish me, they didn't hesitate to sell me off like cattle. While Cedric locked me away and humiliated me, they were busy holding rituals for Bianca's soul, praying for her peace and happiness in the afterlife. It wasn't until the final moments of my last life that I realized something that should have been obvious all along. Some parents don't deserve the title. This time, I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I stepped back, dodging my father's hand with ease. My gaze was cold, sharp, and unyielding as I stared him down. You want to blame me? I said, my voice low and steady. Fine. Let's talk about what really happened. I paused, and then let the truth spill out like venom. Bianca set the fire herself. She tried to burn one of my paintings, one that had scored top marks, because she couldn't stand the thought of me outshining her. She accidentally set the curtains on fire, and the rest is history. My father froze, his hand still hovering in the air. If you don't believe me, you can check the studio's security cameras. I already called to confirm the footage wasn't destroyed in the fire. Bianca, should we go watch it together? Bianca's face turned ghostly pale. Her hands trembled as her eyes darted away from mine. Of course, she wouldn't dare. I smiled. You're lucky, Bianca, I said, my voice as sweet as honey. You'll recover. Cedric, though? He won't. His burns are far worse than yours. And his legs? I leaned in closer, letting my words hang in the air. Gone. Amputated. The great Cedric White, heir to the White family empire, reduced to a cripple in a wheelchair. Bianca's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. The light in her eyes dimmed, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something new: disgust. Ah, there it was. No matter how wealthy or powerful Cedric's family was, he was now broken. And Bianca, my darling sister, had no use for a man who couldn't match her perfect, untouchable image of herself. After all, what use does a swan princess have for a prince who can no longer stand? Chapter 3. My mother wasn't ready to give up. Bianca's legs were burned. We can graft your skin onto hers, she's your sister, for God's sake. There it was again, that familiar, tired ploy. They loved using the older sister card to guilt me into submission. Honestly, it was pathetic. I tilted my head and gave her a faint smile, feigning concern. Mom, did you really not know? Skin grafts don't work when the donor isn't the same person. The body rejects it. These days, hospitals use synthetic skin for burns. Bianca wasn't about to let the moment slip away. Then get me synthetic skin, she shrieked, her voice sharp enough to crack the glass. I don't care what it costs, I don't want scars. Call the doctor. I want the surgery now. As always, my parents scrambled to do her bidding. They spent an obscene amount of money hiring the best specialist they could find, all to ensure Bianca's precious skin remained flawless. By the time evening rolled around, Cedric's parents showed up at our door. Inside, Bianca was lounging with my parents, already planning her glorious comeback. She rattled on about scar treatments and vowed that no matter what, she'd stand on an international stage, dazzling the world once more. She didn't mention Cedric. Not once. When Cedric's parents walked in, the room seemed to freeze. Their faces were stone cold, their presence oppressive. My son risked everything to save you, Cedric's father said, his voice low and cutting. He's crippled now. And yet, you've been awake for hours and haven't bothered to visit him. Why? Cedric's mother stepped forward, her expression just as icy. He's been asking for you, Bianca," she said sharply. "He barely made it through surgery, and the first thing he did was call your name. So why are you still here?" Mr. White grabbed Bianca by the arm, his patience clearly gone. She shrieked, twisting free, her face pale with panic. "Mr. White, you've got it all wrong," she cried, her voice climbing an octave. "Cedric and I aren't a couple. I'm grateful he saved me really, but I can't throw my life away for him. Marriage? Sacrifice? That's out of the question. I never asked him to save me, he did it on his own. He's just a pathetic guy who follows me around. None of this is my fault." The room went silent. Cedric's parents stared at her, their disbelief plastered across their faces. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. They'd already heard about Cedric's condition, and now they too thought he wasn't good enough for Bianca. My father coughed awkwardly, and then stepped forward with a forced smile. "Mr. White, let's not let this affect our family's relationship. Cedric did something heroic, and we'll never forget that. To show our gratitude, I'm willing to offer him a 10% stake in our company. I hope this will ease the situation." 10%? Cedric's father hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You think 10% is enough to cover my son's legs?" His face darkened, his fury barely contained. I decided it was time to step in. Wiping at my eyes as though holding back tears, I spoke softly. "My sister's actions have caused so much pain, and as her older sister, it's my responsibility to apologize on her behalf. Mr. White, if you don't mind, I'd like to visit Cedric with you. Maybe I can help." Mr. White blinked at me surprised. Then he sighed heavily and nodded. "You know, the two of you might look exactly alike, but you couldn't be more different. The older sister is kind and considerate, while the younger one, she's nothing but a selfish snake." Was that so? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly to myself. In my past life, this same man had pointed his finger at me and called me a venomous woman who drove my own sister to her accident. And now, that very title had landed squarely on Bianca's shoulders. Oh, how the tables had turned. But I wasn't going to Cedric to apologize. I was going to see the pathetic mess he'd become. When I entered Cedric's hospital room, he was lying there, pale and frail, the sheets pulled up to his chest. The moment he saw me, his face softened. A weak, hopeful smile spread across his lips. "Bianca," he whispered. "You came." Poor thing. Bianca had a mole at the end of her left brow, while I had a small beauty mark near my eye. It didn't take him long to notice the difference. His smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face. "It's you," he said, his voice cracking. "Why are you here? Did something happen to Bianca? Why isn't she here?" I stepped closer, letting the coldness in my gaze cut through him. "Bianca's fine," I said evenly. "She just doesn't want to see you." His breath hitched. He stared up at me in disbelief, but then, as if clinging to hope, he shook his head. No, she's just scared. That's all. She's always been timid. The accident must have shaken her up. And my parents, they've never liked her. She's probably afraid they'll blame her. That's why." How touching. Even now, lying there in agony, he was still making excuses for her. His devotion was almost comical. I leaned in slightly. My voice was soft but sharp enough to pierce. "Bianca said you're just a friend. She's grateful for what you did, but she has no intention of repaying you with her life." Tears welled in Cedric's eyes. His voice cracked as he tried to argue, desperation leaking from every word. "Sandra, stop trying to twist her words. My Bianca would never say that. She loves me. We promised each other we'd be together. She accepted my confession, she doesn't." Mr. White interrupted coldly, stepping into the room. His voice was like ice, cutting through Cedric's delusions. "You loved the wrong person, Cedric. She's nothing but a heartless little snake." The light in Cedric's eyes dimmed. He looked up at his father, the one person he couldn't doubt, and the truth hit him like a blow to the chest. But I wasn't finished. Straightening, I delivered the final strike with calm precision. Do you know why she doesn't want you anymore? I glanced at the empty space beneath the sheets where his legs had been. It's because you've lost your legs. She said a cripple has no business being with someone as perfect as her. Cedric's eyes widened in horror. His hands shook as he ripped back the blanket, revealing the empty space where his legs used to be. No. His voice broke. No. My legs, my legs. The scream that followed was raw and animalistic, like the sound of a man whose soul had just been ripped apart. He tried to pull himself out of bed, but without his legs, he collapsed onto the floor, landing in a heap. This was the great Cedric White, the golden prince everyone adored. And now, he lay before me, broken and pathetic, clawing at the floor like a wounded animal. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Chapter 4. When Bianca saw the photo of Cedric on my phone, her face twisted into something between horror and disgust. She recoiled, and then gave me that trademark sneer of hers. You're into Cedric, aren't you? She said, her tone dripping with mockery. Fine. You can have him. Tell him to stop clinging to me, I'm done with him. I never want to see him again. I couldn't help but laugh. Cedric's so-called devotion? What a beautiful, tragic comedy. The three of us had grown up together, childhood friends, long before we understood what that even meant. Our families had been close for generations, and even before we were born, the marriage between Cedric and me or Bianca was already set in stone. But then my mother gave birth to twins, and everything changed. Suddenly, Cedric had a choice. From the moment we could talk, my parents drilled one thing into my head. You're the older sister. You take care of Bianca. You protect her, no matter what. So that's what I did. I kept Cedric and Bianca out of trouble, stopped them from getting hurt, and made sure they never crossed any dangerous lines. But Cedric didn't want protection. He wanted excitement. And Bianca? She was a firecracker, reckless, impulsive, always ready to throw caution to the wind. She was the one who made him laugh, who convinced him to skip school and sneak into bars, who dragged him on wild, last-minute road trips. And me? I stayed behind, locked away in my studio, pouring everything I had into my art. Bianca wasn't a gifted dancer. She had no natural talent, no spark. But my parents didn't care. They threw money at competitions, bought her awards, and polished her image until it shone. Meanwhile, I knew that if I didn't work 10 times harder, I'd be nothing more than a footnote in her story, just a shadow to highlight her light. When we were in high school, Cedric picked up smoking because Bianca thought it was cool. I confronted him about it, telling him to quit. He smirked and blew a ring of smoke in my face. Sandra, do you ever stop nagging? You're so boring. Spending time with you feels like a punishment. Bianca, though she's the only one who makes me feel alive. He told me Bianca was his future. I wonder if he still feels that way. Now, Cedric lay in a hospital bed, his legs gone, his body broken. The golden boy who once ruled over everyone now couldn't even stand. I uploaded the photo of him weak, helpless, pathetic to social media. It spread like wildfire. Cedric had made plenty of enemies during his reign. He was ruthless, using his family's power to crush anyone who got in his way. Now that he'd fallen, all those people were lining up to take their revenge. And I wasn't going to stop them. While Cedric wasted away in the hospital, Bianca was busy winning first place in the city's dance competition. Of course, she didn't win on talent. My parents had pulled every string they could to secure her victory. She didn't visit Cedric. Not once. But Cedric couldn't let her go. He spent hours replaying her interviews, his eyes glued to the screen as if her smile could somehow ease his pain. And me? I started spending more time with him. I showed up at the hospital almost every day, bringing him food and helping him with his rehab. My parents called it atoning for Bianca's mistakes, but I knew the truth. This wasn't about redemption. I was going to destroy him. Over time, Cedric started to see me differently. The desperation in his eyes softened whenever I walked into the room. He started to rely on me, to cling to me in ways that made my skin crawl. His parents, who had always adored Bianca, began to praise me instead. They said I was kind, dependable, the perfect future daughter-in-law. They didn't realize they were handing me the tools I needed to tear Cedric apart. I used their influence to secure a spot at one of the country's top art schools. My talent spoke for itself. My entrance exam scores were the highest in the province and second in the nation. From that moment on, I threw myself into my work. I spent my days in the studio, perfecting my craft, entering competitions, and building a name for myself. My visits to Cedric became less frequent. I always had an excuse: a class, a project, an exhibition. But Cedric couldn't stand it. He called me constantly, leaving dozens of voicemails and texts, growing more panicked with every unanswered call. One afternoon, he showed up at my school. I was at a club event, dancing with one of my classmates. His hand was on my waist, guiding me as we moved together. Cedric saw us and snapped. He tried to stand, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair as he struggled to push himself up. But his legs refused to cooperate. He collapsed back into the chair, trembling with frustration and rage. Unable to act himself, he gave a sharp nod to the bodyguards he'd brought with him. One of them stepped forward and punched the boy I was dancing with, sending him sprawling to the ground. Then Cedric wheeled himself over to me, grabbed my wrist and yanked me close. His grip was iron tight, his voice low and venomous. "Don't even think about running from me," he growled. "You're mine, Sandra. Do you hear me? This life, this world, you belong to me." I smiled softly, my voice calm and soothing. "Cedric, how could I ever leave you? You're the most important person in my life. I love you." The tension in his shoulders eased, his grip loosening just enough for me to slip free. "Promise me," he whispered. "Promise me you'll never let go of my hand. Promise me you'll stay with me forever." "Of course," I said, my smile widening. "I'll always stay by your side." But inside, I was laughing. He was unraveling piece by piece, growing more paranoid and desperate with every passing day. His words made my stomach churn, but I didn't mind. There was still so much more I could do to him. This was just the beginning. Chapter 5. I went home for the weekend. The first thing I saw when I walked through the door was Bianca, sprawled on the couch with her new boyfriend. They weren't exactly subtle about what they'd been doing. My unexpected arrival clearly annoyed her. She sat up, fixing me with a glare. "Why are you even here?" she snapped. "What's the point of wasting your life with a cripple? Is that why you look so miserable all the time? Jealous, aren't you? My man's rich, powerful, and knows how to take care of me. Maybe you should have stayed out." I didn't bother responding, but my eyes lingered on the man next to her. I recognized him instantly. Eamon, Cedric's closest friend. The two of them used to be inseparable, drinking, partying, and living like kings. Cedric's circle was made up of men like Eamon, wealthy, arrogant, and untouchable. Bianca wasn't stupid, she understood how things worked. In the world we lived in, power wasn't just about money. It was about connections. And Cedric? His friends were just as valuable as he was. Bianca knew latching onto one of them meant a lifetime of luxury. I didn't say a word. I just grabbed my things and walked out. That night, I told Cedric about Bianca's latest conquest. The reaction was immediate. For a moment, he just stared at me, stunned into silence. Then, the anger hit. His face twisted with rage, and his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "That witch!" he spat, his voice trembling. "And Eamon. That bastard." His words came faster, louder, each one dripping with venom. "They deserve each other. A whore and a bastard, perfect match. I hope they rot in hell together." But his fury didn't last long. It never did. Soon enough, the anger gave way to something else, something pathetic and raw. Before I could react, Cedric leaned into me, his hands gripping my arms as if I were the only thing keeping him upright. His voice cracked, trembling with desperation. "Sandra," he whispered, his eyes red and pleading. "I only have you now. You're all I have left. You're my anchor, my hope. You're the only reason I've made it this far." His breath hitched, and tears spilled down his face. "Please. Don't leave me. Don't abandon me like she did. I can't take it. I'll lose my mind. I'll go insane. I need you. I love you." His voice broke on the last word, and he started to sob. He buried his face in my shoulder, his tears soaking into my skin. I reached out, gently stroking his hair, my movements slow and deliberate. I let him cry, let him cling to me as if his life depended on it. But inside, I felt nothing. Love me? No. Cedric didn't love me. I was nothing more than his backup plan. A stand-in. A convenient substitute for the people who had abandoned him. He didn't care about me. He cared about not being alone. I wasn't his anchor. I was his safety net, the last thing standing between him and the abyss. It was pathetic, really. Cedric knew what it meant to truly love someone. But he didn't think I deserved that kind of love. Instead, he used the word as a weapon, something to manipulate me, to trap me. He was a hypocrite. Everything about him, his tears, his desperation, his empty words disgusted me. And yet, I knew him. I knew how his mind worked, how he couldn't let things go. Cedric wasn't the type to forgive or forget. Sure enough, he didn't waste any time. Within days, he was already pulling strings, using his family's power to go after mine. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. In just 2 months, our company's market value dropped by 30%. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, disaster struck. Bianca and Eamon were in a terrible car accident while on vacation. The call came late at night. My mother's voice was panicked, her words spilling out in a frantic rush. "Bianca's legs, they're in awful shape. The doctors say she'll need extensive skin grafts, far more than last time. The damage is horrific. They're estimating the cost in the millions." My father's voice cut in, firm and urgent. "We have to do it. No matter what it takes, we'll find the money. Saving Bianca's legs is the priority." But then my mother hesitated. Her voice wavered, turning uncertain. "The thing is, you don't know. The company's in trouble. We've lost so much money lately we don't even have 10,000 left to spare." And just like that, their real reason for calling became clear. "Sandra," my mother said, her tone sharpening. "You're dating Cedric, aren't you? The White family has plenty of money. Go to him. Beg if you have to. Do whatever it takes to get the money. Your sister's life depends on it." I let out a bitter laugh. And what if Cedric asks for something I can't give? What if he tried to murder me? For a brief moment, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they didn't know. Maybe they hadn't realized in my past life, and he did murder me. And if they did know, surely, this time, they'd choose me. Surely, this time, they'd protect me. But my mother's answer came swiftly, cutting through any lingering illusions I had. "I don't care," she snapped, her voice sharp and cold. "If that's what it takes to save your sister, and then so be it." And just like that, the last of my hope crumbled into dust. To them, I was never more than an afterthought, a tool, a shadow, something less than human. So why should I cling to the last shreds of a family bond that had never truly existed? "I understand, Mom," I said, my voice quiet, obedient. She wanted me to pay for Bianca's surgery, so I did. Like the dutiful daughter I'd always pretended to be, I handed over the money without complaint. But when the bandages were removed, the room erupted into chaos. The skin grafts on Bianca's legs weren't what anyone expected. Instead of human skin, her legs were patched with fish skin. Her scream tore through the air, raw and animalistic, as she stared down in horror. "What the hell is this? Who did this to me?" My parents froze, stunned into silence. It took a moment for the shock to wear off, and when it did, they turned on me with predictable fury. "Sandra!" My mother shrieked, her voice trembling with rage. "You ungrateful brat! How could you do this to your sister?" Bianca's face contorted with rage as she lunged at me, her hands clawing at the air. "You ruined my life, Sandra? You've destroyed me. How am I supposed to face anyone now?" I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped back, keeping my expression calm, though a hint of something almost sympathetic played at the corners of my lips. When I spoke, my voice was soft, almost mournful. "Ruined your life? How can you say that, Bianca? You were the one who set yourself on fire, weren't you? You were the one who ended up in that car crash with Eamon. I wasn't even there." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "And when Mom and Dad couldn't afford your surgery," I continued, my tone turning just slightly sharper. "I was the one who stepped in. I used every penny I had saved from my part-time jobs to pay for it. Do you know how long it took me to save that money? I gave you everything I had, Bianca. Everything. So don't stand there and accuse me of ruining your life. I did the best I could." For a moment, she froze, her anger momentarily displaced by confusion. But then the realization hit her, and her rage returned in full force. "You could have gone to Cedric," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're his girlfriend, aren't you? $1 million is nothing to him. If you'd just asked, he would have given it to you in an instant." My mother joined in, her voice shrill and cutting. "You selfish little girl. You did this on purpose, didn't you? You're punishing your sister by pretending you don't have options. How dare you? I can't believe I gave birth to someone like you." She spat, her face twisted in disgust. "If I'd known you'd turn out like this, I would have drowned you the day you were born." The words should have hurt. Once, they would have. But now, they didn't even sting. My father raised his hand, his expression dark with fury. My mother followed his lead, both of them ready to strike me down, just as they had so many times before. As a child, every time Bianca cried, every time she pointed her finger at me, I was the one who paid the price. Their fists and belts were always waiting for me. But this time, things were different. Before their hands could come down, Cedric's bodyguard stepped in, intercepting them with swift precision. The room fell silent as Cedric entered, wheeled in by one of his men. Even in a wheelchair, he carried himself with a commanding presence that instantly dominated the space. His gaze swept over the scene, cold and unyielding, before settling on my parents. "You're right," he said, his voice low but laced with venom. $1 million is nothing to me. If Sandra had asked, I would have given it to her. But if it's for Bianca?" He let the question hang for a moment, his lips curling into a sneer. "Not a chance. I wouldn't give her a single cent." He turned his attention to Bianca, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You're alive because of me. I was the one who saved you. And now, I regret it." His tone darkened further, his words dripping with contempt. "I should have left you in that fire." Bianca's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing uselessly as she tried to process what he'd just said. "Sandra," he said, his voice quieter now but no less bitter. "Do you know what I regret most? Running into that fire. If only I hadn't tried to save her. If only you'd stopped me. You loved me then, didn't you? Why didn't you hold me back? If you'd just stopped me, I wouldn't have lost my legs." I turned to him, my gaze cold and unflinching. "How dare you?" I said, my voice icy. "Bianca was the person you loved most in the world. Everything that's happened, all the pain, all the loss, it's exactly what you wanted. You fought for this, Cedric. You sacrificed everything for her." I leaned closer, my tone cutting like a blade. "There's no undoing what you've done. No second chances. The world doesn't sell regret, Cedric. And even if it did, you'd never be able to afford the cost." Chapter 6. I ignored him, and Cedric turned all his hatred towards Bianca. Bianca was expelled from school, and my parents begged me to persuade Cedric to let go of his grudge. The next day, our family company went bankrupt. They cried and wailed, but I shrugged. I tried to persuade him, but Cedric wouldn't listen. I have no say in the Benson family's business. But don't worry, I have a way to earn the money for Bianca's surgery. Hearing this, my mother looked at me with surprise. Really? How? I handed her a flyer. It read, National Art Competition, Seeking New Art Stars. After reading it, my mother tore the flyer to pieces. Now is not the time. How can you only think about yourself? I pieced the flyer back together and handed it to her again. Mom, look here. It says the competition winner will sign with an international art team and receive a $1 million grant, just enough for Bianca's surgery. Hearing this, my mother's eyes gleamed with greed. She looked me up and down with disdain. Do you think you can win? I had anticipated her reaction and showed her all my art certificates and awards. Seeing my drawer full of honors, my mother was astonished. I had no idea you. She trailed off, unable to find the words. I think she realized she had been a negligent mother. They had poured everything into Bianca, who achieved nothing. Meanwhile, the daughter they ignored was a star student with countless accolades. But none of that mattered now. I needed them to willingly become my pawns. Are you sure you'll use the prize money for Bianca's surgery? Under my mother's skeptical gaze, I nodded firmly. My sister's future is most important. I promise if I enter the competition, I'll win. But the entry fee is $10,000. Knowing they had no money, I handed her a loan agency's card. The deadline is today. Once I win, we'll quickly pay it back. My mother hesitated but finally decided to take the gamble. Gradually, my parents stopped caring about Bianca and focused on supervising my training. On the day of the competition, they brought Bianca along to see me off. But as soon as Bianca got in the car, she started crying and accusing my parents of favoritism. They were willing to take out a loan for my competition but not for her surgery. My mother slapped her hard. Bianca, the company is bankrupt. Even if we could borrow $1 million, we couldn't repay it. Your sister can use $10,000 to earn $1 million. Only if Sandra wins can we afford your surgery. Understand? Bianca was slapped so hard she turned her head, her eyes filled with blood. I kindly offered her a handkerchief, which she tore to shreds. Sandra, don't get too smug. You're just a tool for Mom and Dad to make money. You can't take their love from me. I couldn't help but laugh. She was already afraid of being the abandoned child. That slap shattered her confidence. No matter how my parents apologized, Bianca remained sullen, her resentment lingering. Success was within reach. Chapter 7. I advanced through the competition, making it to the finals. Online, people praised me as a genius artist, and the judges believed I would win. At the final event, the audience was packed with supporters. My mother was especially excited, boasting. Sandra is my daughter. She's the genius artist everyone talks about. Her talent comes from me. My father shouted. She's the future art star, our pride. Ignored, Bianca glared at me with hatred. On the dazzling stage under all the cameras, I painted with all my effort, pouring in years of hard work. When I submitted my final piece, it stunned everyone. The screen displayed my work, and the audience erupted in applause. As expected, I won the competition. But just as the host announced my victory, the doors burst open. Cedric, flanked by bodyguards, shouted, "Who allowed you to enter this competition? The winner signs with an international team and stays abroad. Are you planning to leave me quietly?" I looked aggrieved. I was earning money for Bianca's surgery. Mom and Dad begged me to come. One sentence ignited Cedric's fury. Bianca is your daughter, but isn't Sandra too? You've been bleeding her dry for years, even taking her prize money for Bianca. You don't deserve to be her parents. I won't let your scheme succeed. Cedric pointed at my parents, then took the microphone to announce. Sorry, my girlfriend is withdrawing from the competition and forfeiting the prize. This meant giving up the $1 million prize. My parents' faces turned pale and they rushed to stop him. Only Bianca remained still. Cedric said to her, Bianca, you leaked this to me. I'll let you off this time, but don't target Sandra again. My mother was incredulous. You leaked it? You fool! How could I have such a stupid daughter? Bianca laughed maniacally. Yes, I leaked it. Are you heartbroken? Heartbroken that I ruined your genius, artist? My mother was speechless, trembling with anger, and slapped Bianca. Are you out of your mind? Do you know how much money she could have made for the family? We wouldn't have to work, and you wouldn't have to lift a finger. Now you've ruined her. Where's the money for your surgery? Surgery? You remember I need surgery? I thought you only cared about your genius, artist. Bianca laughed hysterically, her laughter turning into sobs. My mother was frightened by her, trying to comfort her. We love you most. Everything we do is for you. She reached out to hug Bianca, but Bianca pushed her away. Enough! You hypocritical parents. I hate you. My mother's hand froze in mid-air, speechless. My father roared. Bianca, we've pampered you since you were born, fulfilling your every wish. And you call us hypocrites? Where's your conscience? That's because I'm prettier and sweeter than Sandra. You were proud to show me off. Now that I'm ruined, you see Sandra's talent and want to replace me. You'd throw me away like trash. I won't let you. I'll destroy Sandra, destroy all your hopes. You don't deserve to be parents. Bianca's screams echoed and my mother fainted. My father called an ambulance and the scene was chaotic. Meanwhile, Cedric had already taken me outside. Everything that happened today was within my expectations. Biased parents, a mad sister, a crippled, paranoid boyfriend. Any one of these would be a sensational story, especially on a grand stage, drawing immense attention. The public first admired my talent, then sympathized with my unfair treatment. This move was a success. Through this live broadcast competition, I became famous overnight. Countless teams extended invitations, and galleries offered to fully fund my solo exhibitions. My future was bright. Cedric took this opportunity to propose, and I accepted without hesitation. As he placed the ring on my finger, I knew the day I had long awaited had finally arrived. Chapter 8. Cedric planned a grand wedding for me, inviting the entire city. There were thousands of tables and the hall could accommodate tens of thousands. Cedric went abroad to order a unique diamond wedding dress for me. The dress was encrusted with priceless jewels. Cedric said he wanted me to be the most dazzling princess on our wedding day. In my previous life, I had longed for his love and a grand wedding. But all I got was his cruelty and a tragic end. Belated affection is worthless. I cut up the custom-made wedding dress and threw away the diamond ring. On the wedding day, I packed my bags and sent Cedric a message. A man who lost his legs for another woman doesn't deserve me. Being with you makes me sick. Then I turned off my phone and boarded the plane without looking back. I had accepted an offer from a prestigious international school. My life was just beginning. I wouldn't stop for a scumbag. The consequences of loving bravely in my past life were still vivid. Cedric, this time, you'll be the laughingstock of the city, feeling the sting of betrayal. 3 years later, I became an internationally renowned landscape artist. My schedule was packed, often flying around the world for exhibitions. At one show, I ran into an old friend who couldn't wait to tell me. Your parents are in debt, unable to repay high-interest loans. They're homeless, struggling to eat. Really? I smiled. I'm not interested. They're not my parents. My friend was taken aback, then looked at me sympathetically. I know your parents well. They always favored Bianca and treated you poorly. They deserve this. You have no obligation to support them. But did you hear? Bianca suffered a series of accidents, couldn't handle the stress, and developed severe PTSD. She's in a mental hospital now. Seeing my indifference, my friend changed the subject. Your runaway wedding caused quite a stir. Cedric became a global joke. The media said he searched the whole city for his missing bride, nearly going mad. He's been looking for you everywhere, even asking me about you. I hid your international artist name from him. He has no idea about your success. Honestly, Cedric doesn't deserve you. I shrugged. It's all in the past. I wouldn't let past wounds blind me to the future. No relationship is unbreakable, no revenge unachievable. Over the years, I had moved on. My friend toasted me. Sandra, you're doing great now. I hope you never face those troubles again. But things never go as planned. The next day, I got a call from the police. They told me Bianca had injured a staff member at the mental hospital and escaped. I had to return home. After making a statement at the police station, I was heading back to my hotel when someone grabbed my neck and dragged me into an alley. Chapter 9. Seeing the face of my attacker, my heart sank. Bianca, it's you! She looked like a madwoman, her hair disheveled, her eyes bloodshot. She gripped my neck tightly, cursing through clenched teeth. I've waited so long for this day. Sandra, you finally came back. It's all your fault. Everything went wrong. I was supposed to be the famous one. You stole my spotlight. Sandra, I'll kill you. Kill you! She muttered, pulling a knife from her pocket. But after a lifetime of suffering, I was no longer a lamb to the slaughter. I bit her hand hard, using all my strength, and her skin tore. The pain made her step back several paces. I took the chance to run, but Bianca chased me with the knife. As I reached an intersection, a car suddenly blocked my path. Bianca lunged at me, and the car door opened. A figure moved quickly to shield me. Bianca's knife plunged into that person's body. I finally saw clearly it was Cedric. Ignoring his injury, Cedric subdued Bianca and called the police. I watched coldly, finding it all quite amusing. Let them destroy each other. I turned to leave, but Cedric called out to me. He said, Sandra, one night after you left, I remembered everything. You once stopped me from rushing into the fire. I was so happy, thinking I wouldn't be a cripple. But in that world, I blamed you for everything. I tortured you like a madman, locking you in the sauna to make you feel Bianca's pain. In the end, you died in the sauna. After you died, I felt empty inside. I didn't know you would die. The sauna's temperature got out of control. I realized I had fallen in love with you, but there was a life between us. I didn't want to bear the pain, so I made you suffer. After you died, I turned myself into the police, but I couldn't bring you back. Cedric's face was covered in tears. A knife was lodged in his chest, but he felt no pain. Because his heart was already numb with pain. Sandra, these 3 years, I've watched you achieve everything. You're amazing. I don't deserve you. I never dared to disturb you. I know I have no right to disrupt your life now. He looked at me with red eyes, full of pain. But Sandra, can you forgive me? I'm dying. Blood bloomed on Cedric's chest. He gasped and collapsed. I remembered the days he tortured me, begging for his forgiveness countless times. He said, "A grudge that cuts to the bone should never be forgotten." I said calmly, "I won't forgive you. Even if you saved me just now, I won't." Someone once told me a grudge that cuts to the bone should never be forgotten. Cedric stared at me, speechless. The police and ambulance arrived quickly. The police restrained the nearly insane Bianca. Cedric was taken to the hospital. With a wound to his heart, Cedric died that night. Bianca was convicted of assaulting hospital staff, arson, and murdering Cedric. She was sentenced to death, executed immediately. My parents' beloved princess couldn't give them a single day of peace. In my previous life, Cedric tortured me for Bianca. In this life, they destroyed each other, meeting a tragic end. This might be the retribution for evil, but it no longer concerned me. When I returned to hold an art exhibition, a pair of homeless people claiming to be my parents approached me. "Sandra, we were wrong. We bet on the wrong horse. Please give us another chance. We'll cherish you this time." Listening to their ridiculous pleas, I had security throw them out. In this life, I built my stage with my dreams. I only needed to love myself. I only needed to look forward. The sacred halls of art would open their doors to me. Let those false loves and family ties go to hell. The end.